where you were born.
Okay, I could tell you something about that. I was there.
And you remember the whole thing.
The whole thing. Now, I was born in Amite, Louisiana, which is the seat of the Ellis family. My great-grandfather moved there in 1857. No, my great-great-grandfather moved there in 1857, and he built a house, the weirdest design. They called it Ingleside, which means fireside, but it's two. Well, no, I can't say that. There's two sides to it, and the roof goes. He's got two roofs, one, and they meet in the middle, right over the middle of the hall, so that from almost the inception of the occupation of that house, there was a leak right in the middle of the hall, and it was temporarily fixed by generation after generation, but it was always there. And the house had, originally it was a 4-room dog trot house with a big gallery all the way around it. And then as children came and went and grew up and brought their families in and didn't, they would chop it up to make more rooms. When I was a child, I think they had about 8 bedrooms in there and 1 bathroom. No, 2 bathrooms. They had two, one for Uncle Bob and Aunt Maud, who were the senior members of the family at that time, and one for everybody else. The dining room was in a separate building. That was very common in those days. So dining rooms and kitchens tended to burn down. And so they built a separate little house out here. One big room for the dining room, and then a little room for a pantry, and then a bigger room for the kitchen. And they did all the cooking out there. And to get to it, you would go out in the back gallery and step down a step and be on the porch of the building that held the dining room and go in the dining room. And they had a great big table in there. And if you happen to walk in at a mealtime, it didn't make any difference. There's plenty of food. They'd say, "Oh, sit down, sit down." They'd come and put another plate. You'd sit down, and heaps of food. It was, well, anyhow. And after my mother and daddy were first married, they lived there at Ingleside. Now, Ingleside had seen the comings and goings of many members of the family. And a lot of children have been born there. Uncle Bob and Aunt Maud, I think, had 6. And there are a lot of them that didn't survive. Not just their children, everybody's children. And they had a room called the birthing room. It was specially reserved for when somebody was in labor. They'd put them in the birthing room to deliver the baby. In those days, I'm not sure that they had doctors or midwives or what the proceeding was. But my great uncle Steve, after whom I am named, was married 3 times, and each of his wives died in childbirth in the birthing room. So when Mama was pregnant with me, they all assumed that she'd have the baby there. And she said, "Not me. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to have the baby somewhere else." And so there was a little house out in the front yard. I suppose at one time it might have been a slave cabin, but they were using it for a hay barn. And they took the hay out and fixed it up and put furniture in it. And Mother and Dad moved in there, and that's where I was born, in that little house. And I can remember as a boy going out there, and they'd say, "That's where you were born, Stevie." And it was a hay barn again.
It's still there?
No, it fell down a couple of years ago. I went out, about 6 or 8 years ago, I was out there, and my cousin Harold Weathersby owns the house now. And I was telling him I was born in that house. He used to be, "Oh," he said, "it's still there." I said, "What?" Yeah, he says, right over there. And I look, and there's this big thicket, the Yupon thicket. And above the top of the Yukon, you barely see the peak of the house there. I said, can you get in there? He said, no. He says, Yupon's too thick. I said, oh, well, I just kind of like to see the place I was born. And the next time we were up there, Harold had gotten out the bush hog and gone over there and cut a path into the house. So we went over there, and I got to walk around in the house I was born in, which was it was dry inside, but otherwise horrible shape. And Harold told me the last time I was over there, it had fallen down. So what should be a National Historic Monument is no more.
It's no more.
Yeah. As I told you in the last episode, the original Ellis house was named Ingleside, and it sat on the Ingleside tract was 44 acres. And if you went across the Ellis Road, which was right in front of it, there was a big cow pasture. And on the other side of the cow pasture was about a 10-acre gravel pit that when I was a kid they were still pumping out of, but at some point they stopped when I was, 8 or 10 years old. And they moved further out. They'd pump that out. So they'd move further out and put it in another pit. But they had a donkey line that came in to there, and railroad, a little train would run in from over on the IC Railroad, which was about a mile away. And they'd come in and load up at the what they call those things? I can't remember what they call them. What they did was they graded the gravel in there. They ran it through. They ran it through these big filters, and the big little rocks would go through the holes in the top. And they had about 4 levels, which have big rocks and middle-sized rocks and lower middle-sized rocks, and pea gravel down at the bottom. So that right there they graded it on the spot as they were washing it, and then they would load up the gravel cars with it, and the train would go out the track to IC, and we always knew when it was coming. We had the whistle went wee-oo, 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 like that. So you knew that was a dummy line and not the big railroad track. And he'd pull gravel loaded cars up and drop them off on the side, and the big trains come along, pick them up, and take them into New Orleans. Well, I don't know what the Yankee company did with them, but that's where it went. And the Yankees pumped gravel out of there for 50 years, I guess. And that's still gravel. It's still there. But they didn't want to tear up the whole property. On the other side of the gravel pit was 200 acres that ran down to the Chancellorsville River, and we owned that too. And maybe some land on the other side. I'm not sure, because my Uncle Bob had built a house. I have to go back a step, because my great-grandfather, Thomas Cargill Warner Ellis, who was a judge over in New Orleans, was tired of being jammed up at Ingleside, so he bought a house on Duncan Avenue about a mile away and moved his children in there. And he had, that I knew, Aunt Sarah, Teen, Aunt Ollie, 3 daughters, a son, my grandfather, who fell out of the family tradition, became a doctor, and another son, John, who also became a doctor. All the other guys in the family were lawyers and judges, but he was the doctor. Those 2 were doctors. Fun thing about my grandfather is he was He married Lucy Coughlin, a beautiful, beautiful woman. And they had, in 1895, my Uncle Hamilton Ellis. And then in 1897, my father, and Lucy Coughlin died right after my father was born. A couple of months, she got some sort of childbed fever and never got over it. And so my grandfather, who up till then had been a practicing physician, decided medicine was not to him anymore because it didn't work. Mm-hmm. So he quit and became a Christian Scientist. And I don't know, before I was born, he had moved to Boston and went to work for the Mother Church up there. And the rest of his life, he was a working Christian Scientist. And he converted my aunts to Christian Science. And so they all, when I'd go up there in the summer, they would all get together and do their lesson every day. And I would join in with them doing the lesson. It was I can't remember the name of the book anymore. Mary Baker Eddy wrote the book. She was the founder of Christian Science. It wasn't Science and Health, something like that. By Mary, I'm afraid I'm getting way off point. Anyhow, he built this, he bought this house over at Duncan Avenue, and sometime around the turn of the century, around 1900, he picked it up and moved it back 300 yards from Duncan Avenue. And he put a big colonial front, a big grand colonial front gallery on it. And then he built a whole new addition on the back of bedrooms and halls and kitchens and dining rooms and whatnot. So it wound up with a house that had 7 bedrooms when I was a boy, 7 bedrooms and 1 bath. I'm sure that the bath wouldn't put it in much before I was born, but nobody ever seen mine. There was never any trouble, nobody beating on the door to get in or anything. But I think when it was built, there was no bath. They had it was originally a dog trot, 4-room dog trot. Well, the rooms are gigantic. And the dog trot must have been 20 feet wide. And it ran from the front of the house all the way to the back of the house. And it ended in a wall with doors in it and no steps or anything. If you ever went through that door, you were dead. Because when he moved, he also raised it up about 4 or 5 feet. So in the front, it was maybe 4 feet off the ground. In the back where the kitchen was, it was maybe 8 feet off the ground because the ground fell off. And apparently he had intended to put some bedrooms upstairs because there was this very grand looking staircase in the front hall that went up like this and into the attic. A great big attic, and it was just full of stuff. They'd been putting stuff in that attic for 100 years. And that was on bad days, rainy days, that's what we'd do. We'd go up there and just poke around trying to find stuff.
Treasures.
Oh, it was just a wonderful treasure hunt we found. They never threw anything away. Never threw anything away. If they weren't using it, they'd put it in the attic. They had old cooking implements going back how long, I do not know. And furniture, they had enough furniture up there to do another house. And I found my grandfather's old surgical kit. When he quit practicing medicine and surgery, it was just beautifully fitted out. It had his initials in silver, and you could lock it and unlock it with a silver key. And you open it up and there's all these scalpels, and then you take a tray out and more stuff down. And it was about so big, but a complete surgical kit. And we found some sort of an electrical outfit. He would treat people with electricity. You know, he'd stick your thumb in the contacts and then turn it up and give you run a little electricity through your body. In the late 18th century, 19th century, that was supposed to work pretty well, and a lot of doctors tried it out, and he was one of them. Of course, that's why it was in attic, because he either it didn't work or he quit working. I'm not sure which one.
What happened to all that stuff?
I don't know. My great aunts who owned it, Aunt Sarah and Aunt Martina, were living in it by themselves. And my Aunt Ollie was married to a man named Bullet Grant. And Uncle Bullet had money. Some, I don't know how much. But he had enough income to where he and Aunt Ollie could go and live wherever they wanted to. Aunt Ollie had the asthma. And so they would go to Texas, with Comfort, Texas. They lived in Comfort, Texas. We lived in Wytheville, Virginia. They lived in other places. And I went to see them in Comfort and Wytheville. I remember I was 5 when I went to Wytheville, Virginia to see them. And I think 8 when I went out to Comfort, Texas. In Virginia, in Wytheville, the house they were renting had an apple orchard attached to it. And the treatment one of the treatments for asthma in those days was living in the right place. Well, they had what they call asthma cigarettes. And Aunt Ollie would light up a cigarette and, I don't know if she was inhaling or not, but since they were good for you, she would give me one. We'd smoke together out in the apple orchard. I was 5 years old puffing away on that asthma cigarette. I was about 5 and I wanted to be a Boy Scout. And so they bought me some kind of jumpsuit and a big farmer's hat. And told me that was a Boy Scout uniform. And I've got some pictures of me in that outfit. Didn't fool anybody with me, but it worked. Every summer, when the school was out, Mother and Dad would send us, more me than my brothers, but all of us, up to Amite. And off and on, we stayed there all summer long. And they were free of the necessity of taking care of the 3 boys. And they could do what they wanted to do. What a deal for them. And what a deal for us. We're in this big house. Our aunts really didn't care what we did. And we get up and have breakfast in the morning. We hit the woods. No shoes, man. We were all barefooted. And we just, every year we'd explore a little bit further out. And I guess when I was about 10 or 12 years old, we found the Changeable River. That was at the far end of our property, a couple of miles away. And so that was where we went every day, swim in the river. Then we found the mouth of Big Creek. Big Creek was you talk about cold water. Even in the dead of summer, you'd freeze to death in that thing. That's where everybody wanted to swim, of course. And there was always a swimming hole in Big Creek that all the kids in town would go to. They'd drive around and come up on it from the back. We would hike across the sand dunes. I'll tell you about them in a minute. Hike across the sand dunes and through the river swamp and wade up the river to way up Big Creek to the swimming hole. And that was just so much fun. We played, can't remember the name of the game now, but one guy was it and everybody else. He'd stand on one side of the river and you'd be on the other, and they'd say whatever the secret word was, and everybody would dive in the river. And I'd know to get to the other side without that guy catching you. And of course that could go on for an hour or so. Then the last guy up won. And he got to be the first one for the next game. Man, it was fun.
Tiring.
I'm trying to think, it might have been so. The swimming hole would move because you had to do something to take the water, make the water deep. And the first swimming hole I remember, whoever owned the property must have taken up that thing, whatever it was, because it got shallow there. And so we went upstream about a quarter mile, maybe a little bit more, and there was a log down across the creek. And so of course the water was going under the log and digging out the sand, so we had a nice deep hole. It was over your head in some places. And that was a swimming hole for years and years and years. Still a swimming hole when I quit going to swimming holes. My cousin Robert had a camp. It was customary among politicians in the Florida parishes that you'd have a camp out somewhere on a river. Robert was a district attorney and then the district judge there, and they'd build these camps out there, and they'd have parties, have barbecues, and invite people out, and that's how they kept up their contacts. Jimmy Burns, who was the DA in St. Tammany Parish, where I lived for so long, had one out on the Bogue Chitto River. And, well, I'm not going to talk about what went on in Jimmy's camp,
No.
but I found it just as well not to go to those functions after I got to be the judge there. I decided they'd have too much on me. So I didn't go. But, getting back to the annex, that was, for all of my great-grandfather's descendants, that was a gathering point. We would have great big Christmases there. I can remember one, I think maybe it was 1929, but I just remember it so well because in my family in those days, they didn't put up a tree a week or 2 weeks before Christmas. It went up Christmas Eve after the kids were in bed. And I still remember walking into the library where they had the thing, and it was a big cedar tree, and the ceilings in that house were maybe 14 feet. And this went up and brushed the ceiling and curled down again. And it had all these beautiful old-fashioned ornaments on it. But they lit the tree with candles. They didn't have electric lights. They had these things that clip on and have a little candle about that high on it, and maybe big around as my little finger. And on Christmas morning, they'd all be lit. Now, why that house didn't burn down every Christmas, I don't know. But somehow they got away with it. And to see the smell fill the room, and all these children are in there, and everybody just got so much stuff. And it was just, I think it was 29, because we never had another one like that. Everybody was broke after that.
Did the crash affect you?
Sir?
29 crash affect you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. My daddy was, he and his brother-in-law had inherited my mother's father's insurance agency, which was extremely good. I mean, it's a wonderful agency, and my grandfather did very well with it, and they took it over, and they were doing well with it too. That's why we were so happy in 1929, because of the full effect of the Depression. Nobody suspected things were going to happen the way they did. But Dad's brother-in-law, who married my mother's sister, started keeping the premium money and not sending it to the insurance companies. So of course, the agency went kaflooey, and Dad had to make it up, and because he was a partner, he had to make it up. And at the end of that, he had no job and no money. And so I remember at that point, he was driving a standard coffee truck, delivering coffee for $80 a month. My mama was teaching school for $80 a month, and that's what we were living on. We had my mother and father and 3 kids and my grandmother living with us, and different members of the family would come in and out as circumstances warranted. We were living in a pretty big house, so we had room for them. Yeah, we were poor during the Depression. In 1929, they'd bought a car, the 1929 Chevrolet, and we had that for about 1935 or 6 when Mama wrecked it. I can still remember riding around in that car, and Mama never bought more than a gallon of gas at a time. And there was no gas gauge, so I don't know how she knew when she needed gas and when she didn't. But she knew, and we'd go in there, and she'd drive around. If gas was 12 cents a gallon, she'd drive around looking for 11 cents. Served her right if she run out of gas doing that. But well, that's how much we were paying for gas in those days. And on the weekends when we'd drive up to Amite, which we did maybe once a month, Dad would drive into a filling station on the edge of New Orleans on the way out of town and say, "Fill her up." And that was such a big thrill for us kids. So Mama buys a gallon, you know, and Dad would fill her up. That was really we didn't realize that we were poor. It kind of hit home when I got to the point that when I was going to dances and things, and you'd get your invitations to say, "Please escort Miss So-and-so." And then I'd have to go out and hustle up a ride with somebody. And I got so tired of doing that. But that was just part of life, and I did. Is that enough for now? Now, let's see, we were talking about the old house in Amite, weren't we?
We did the talk, we did the house, we did the family,
Yeah.
much of the history.
Well, didn't do all the family. I had a great aunt who lived up in Kentwood, which is about 20 miles north of Amite. And 1 week every summer, they would ship me up to Aunt Mamie in Kentwood. And I'd stay up there for a week. That was just part of being in the family. Now, Aunt Mamie had been married to John Hamilton Ellis, who was a doctor, and he ran a drugstore and medical office in Kentwood. And they had some kind of difficulty between them, but at any rate, they broke up. And Aunt Mamie stayed on in the old house, a beautiful house on Line Creek, north of Kentwood. And she stayed out there. I don't know where John Ellis went. I never met him. He was dead before I came along. Anyhow, I would stay up there, and the only thing that I really remember about it is that when I was 14, 15, you get to be that age, you begin to have strange feelings and things growing in new places on your body. And, but I wasn't paying too much attention to it. And then I went up to Kentwood, and up there was Babsy LeBlanc. Now, Babsy LeBlanc was the daughter of Doris Kent. The Kents were a big family in Kentwood, and Aunt Mamie was a Kent. Anyhow, I met Babsy LeBlanc, and she also had some new growths on her body. It was the first time I'd ever been with a girl my age who had these growths. And so I was immediately stricken. And I remember, the only thing I do remember for sure is that back of the house down the slope toward the creek, there was a graveyard. Most houses had graveyards behind them. And Babsy dares me to go down that graveyard and bring up back a brick off of one of the tombs. What could I do? I went down there, scared to death, got a brick and brought it back up. Babsy says, "No, don't bring that thing to me." Anyhow, I cut my trip to Amite short by a week so I could ride home on the same train as Babsy LeBlanc. And we had an hour. Took about an hour for the train to go from Amite to New Orleans. We had an hour together, and I never saw Babsy again. But by then, I'd begun to understand that that girls were more interesting than I had thought.
Too funny. Too funny.
My mother's father's name was Henry Ryder. Now, I never met him because he died 2 years before I was born. But he was one of the more interesting members of my family. In his youth, he went to the Naval Academy in Annapolis. And in his sophomore year, youngster year, that's what they call him at the Navy. In his youngster year, he got involved in a hazing scandal. And thinking that he was going to be kicked out, he resigned. And none of the other guys who were involved in the hazing scandal got kicked out, but he had resigned. So he had to go back to New Orleans, and he went to Tulane University. He had almost qualified to be a lawyer by reading law with his brother, and but his writing was his main interest, and he worked for two of the old newspapers back in the pre-1900 days, the Democrat. There's another family connection because my great-grandfather, who moved from Amite and became a judge, was a very dedicated Democrat, shall we say. And he had started a newspaper in Amite to further the Democrat cause, and then he went to New Orleans and started practicing law there. And he started another newspaper. They called it the Democrat because that's what it was. It was to drive the Republicans out. And he didn't actively participate in it, but Henry Ryder did. He was on the staff of that paper. And he got fired because he was sent out to interview some girl who had been involved in some kind of scandal. And he was a nice, persuasive fellow, and according to the story, she just opened up to him and just told him everything because he was a good guy and he could do that. He made her do it. And when he got back to the paper, he told the editor, he said, I can't write this story. This person confided in me, and I just don't think I can write the story. And the editor said, "Well, that's fine, Henry, you're fired." very commendable, but you're fired. No, he went on to write a number of plays, straight plays and musical plays, no dramas, comedies and musicals that were performed in the New Orleans area. But only one of them made it out of New Orleans, and it was performed in Biloxi, Mississippi, and maybe Jackson, Mississippi, two places outside of New Orleans. Most of the music, I think all of the music was lost to the musicals, but I was able to get the scripts, or several of them, from the patent office in Washington. So they still exist in that form. But he also worked for a weekly called The Harlequin, which was very political. It got involved in the big political liberal conservative things of the day, like whether we should occupy the Philippines or not, and that sort of thing. But he wrote a newspaper that was called The Harlequin, and he wrote a weekly column in The Harlequin called Harlequin. And my grandmother, to whom he was married by that time, wrote one under the name of Columbine. And they each had a weekly column side by side for as long as the Harlequin lasted. It went under, but the guy that was doing the Harlequin started a daily called the New Orleans World, of which Henry Ryder was the associate editor. Unfortunately, the World didn't make it. Yeah. So he was out of the newspaper business, but he went to work in the insurance industry and he actually wrote the first workman's compensation law that was passed in Louisiana by the legislature. He wrote it, and a great expert on that. And then he became the state representative for the Employers Group, which was a big national firm, and he was just his business was taken off, and he dropped dead in his office. My grandmother found out about it because she was going home on a streetcar and it was selling the afternoon paper, and I was one of the headlines. And well, she kind of dropped out of the world after that. She lived with us, and she wrote, and she listened to the radio, and she had some friends that would come over and play bridge with her sometime. But she was just not interested in anything except that. Yes. Yeah. In our hideaway, far from all the fuss that bothers us, we'll hide away. We two, in our hideaway, we'll be all alone, no telephone to worry me or you. We will have a ball, busy doing nothing at all in our hideaway. We will lock the door and throw away the key. What a holiday our hideaway will be. If he can fight like he can love, oh, what a soldier boy he'll be. If he's just half as good in the trench as he is in the park on a bench, and every hun will have to run and find a great big linden tree. I know he'll be a hero over there, 'cause he's a bear in any Morris chair. And if he fights like he can love, then it's goodbye Germany. They sent for the army to come to Tulagi, but Douglas MacArthur said no. He gave as his reason, it isn't the season. Besides, there is no USO, USO, USO. Tulagi has no USO. He gave as his reason, it isn't the season. Besides, there is no USO. By the light of the silvery moon, I want a spoon. To my honey I'll croon love tune, honeymoon. Keep it shining in June. Your silvery beams will bring love's dreams. We'll be cuddling soon by the silvery moon. By the light of the silvery moon, I want a spoon. To my honey I'll croon love's tune, honeymoon. Keep it shining in June. Your silvery beams will bring love dreams. We'll be cuddling soon by the silvery moon. Great. All right. Well, what our day had suggested was I'd tell you about Earl Long. Earl, as you know, was a two-time governor of Louisiana and the younger brother of Huey Long. Now, for a little background, I have to tell you that when I went over and started practicing law in St. Tammany Parish, they were still using a courthouse that was built in 1895. And it was, St. Tammany Parish was growing, so the courthouse just didn't have enough room in it anymore. And so they decided to tear it down and build another one on the same spot. And in the meanwhile, they moved the courthouse over into the basketball court of the old grammar school, which is a couple of blocks away. And they had other aspects of the courthouse in different places. But over there they had the clerk of court and the land records, and they had the judge. And the judge's the courtroom was in the basketball court. So it was a big, big room. And well, we got along just fine with it. Now, at that time, Earl Long was the governor of Louisiana, and he began behaving in a very erratic manner. I won't go into that, what it was, but his wife Blanche, who was a very sensible woman, by the way, had him committed to an institution in Galveston, Texas. And they flew him over there and booked him into this place, and he's there a while, and I don't know what the machinations were, but he was then flown back to Louisiana, to St. Tammany Parish, and put in the Southeast Louisiana Hospital, which was a very fine mental hospital operated by the state. And after Earl settled down in there, he got a lawyer, Joe Arthur Sims, an ex-DA from Tangipahoa Parish, to file a suit to get him out. And so this suit was going to be heard in a basketball court of the old grammar school in Covington. And it was a very festive occasion. Earl was popular amongst the country folk of Louisiana, of which we had plenty in St. Tammany Parish. And they all came down to go to it. Now the courtroom would probably handle 750 or 1,000 people, but whatever, it was full. And out in the yard, the PTA was selling stuff. It was I was about to say interesting. It was more than interesting. It had a circus-like atmosphere to it. And I was a young lawyer then. I was in fraction law, 3 or 4 years. And I walked over to the courthouse to see what was going on. Well, not the courthouse, the gymnasium. And I went in and I found a seat along the wall. The whole inside the bar at the up where the judge was full of lawyers. And the whole front row of the seating area was full of psychiatrists. And so I went up and I got a nice seat close enough, and I sat down there and wait to see what was going to happen. After a while, the judge came in, everybody stood up, and he sat down, everybody sat down. And they called the case, and then in comes Earl. He walked in the side door, walked right up to the witness chair, got in and sat down. Everybody stood up at the platform. And the judge didn't make him move or anything. He just let him sitting there, and he said, "All right, let's go. Who are the parties?" And they did all the formal stuff you did before. And then Jack Gremion, the Attorney General of Louisiana, who was there, he stood up and said, "Judge, could we have a few minutes, please?" The judge said, "Sure." So all the lawyers go off in the back. We said, the judge doesn't get down off the bench. He's sitting there. Earl's sitting there. Never changed his expression. He's just sitting there. After a while, Jack Gremion comes back in the room and says, "Judge, we'd like a few more minutes, please." And the judge said, "Certainly." Now I have to tell you that the judge was an old, long man. He had been judge there since 1936, and now we're in the mid-50s. But he was an old, long man. The district attorney of the 22nd Judicial District was an old, long man. And not that either one of them would have done anything that wasn't right, but they were very uncomfortable because of who was sitting in that chair. And a couple more times they repeated this request for more time. And they finally came in and they said, "Judge, we got it worked out." And here's what they did. First, they drew up an order dismissing the head of the Southeast Louisiana Hospital, who was a fine doctor, I have to say. And he was signed by Earl, and he was signed by the lieutenant governor. Now, one of them was the governor, but both of them signed it, so he's out. Then they signed another order appointing old Dr. McClendon from Amite as the superintendent of the hospital. Now, the superintendent of the hospital is the person who can declare on the capacity of the people who are in his hospital. He can say that they're competent or they're not competent. And they drew up a statement for Dr. McClendon, signing that Earl Long was competent. And Dr. McClendon signs it. And Jack Remeon says, Your Honor, this matter is now moot. That means it's over because the superintendent of the hospital had found Earl Long to be competent. And so judge says, case dismissed. You know, he was so relieved. Case dismissed, and everybody jumped up and cheers for Earl, you know, and Earl's still sitting there. He hadn't changed expression yet. Well, it turns out that St. Tammany Baptist is the only place in the world where Earl is considered sane, competent. So he went down and he rented the Pine Tree Inn, which is between Covington and Mandeville. And that became the capital of Louisiana. He went down there and set up an office. And he kind of held court for a while until the heat was off, and then he could go back to Baton Rouge. But the sheriff later told me that Earl says to him, he said, Red, what can I do for you? You've been so good to me here. And Red said, he said, thank you, Governor, but I hadn't done anything. Oh, I got to do something for you. So Red says, well, we could use a state troop here, because we didn't have our own state troopers who do traffic and stuff like that. And Earl said, you got it. And sure enough, man, within 2 weeks, they were building the headquarters of the state troop, and it's still there. sort of a denouement. Red, who had nothing to do with it, was the only one who got anything out of it. And of course, he got it via parish. He also told me this. He says that when they put him on that plane, put Earl Long on that plane to Galveston, they searched him and he had $1,500 on him. So they took the money. And when he got there, put him in, they searched him again and he had $2,500. Then he was in the hospital for a couple of weeks, some period of time, and when they were putting him on a plane to go back to Louisiana, they searched him and he had another $1,500, and they took that. And when he got back to the hospital in Louisiana, they searched him again, and he had another $1,500 on him. And nobody could ever figure out where was Earl getting the money. He loved that stuff. He loved money. And, but that was that story. Earl finished out his term, and I think he and Blanche got a divorce. So that was it. It was a weird scene.
What happened to the head of the hospital that got fired?
He stayed fired. I guess he must have got a job somewhere else. He was a very, very good doctor. That hospital was built by Governor Kennan and started out at sometime around 1952 or 3, something like that. And he was a good governor. He made the best effort he could to have the hospital operated by competent people. And they were. I mean, I knew a lot of them, and they were all good men. And in one fell swoop, by having the the governor and the lieutenant governor both signed an order firing him. That guy just had a job. No reason. They just wanted to get her out the hospital. Well, you know who Mahalia Jackson is.
Oh, yeah.
Mahalia's mother worked for my grandmother there in Louisiana. And she would bring Haley, they called her Haley when she was a little girl. They'd bring Haley, she'd bring Haley to work with her, you know, once in a while, had to play out in the yard. My mother was born in 1900. Mahalia was born about 1911, so there was an age gap there. My mother remembered very well when Haley was there, just playing in the yard and having a good time. And of course, she went on to become quite famous. She started out singing at this little church up in the River Bend, which was not far from where my mama's family was living in, walking distance. And from there she went to the big time up in Chicago and became world famous. Of course, she had a lot of relatives down there. Her brother Peter used to do a lot of work for us, odd jobs. And he and my uncle, my mother's brother, were same age, and they were real close friends. Peter was one of those guys who just sit on the piano and play. He didn't know anything about it. He could just play the piano. And he taught Henry Ryder, my mother's brother, he taught Henry how to play the piano. And since he'd learned on his own, he played the melody in the low note in the treble chord instead of the high note with note. So it sounds a very distinctive sound, and Henry could sit down at the piano and bang away like that, but he always had the melody in the low note. Last time I saw Peter, well, Peter had written a song about Henry. He called it "To Henry to Write To." Don't ask me why. And so one Christmas we were living in a double house, and Henry was living on one side of the house, we were living on the other, and we were all over there Christmas morning, and Peter showed up. And so they gave Peter a drink and asked him to play the piano, and he just sit down and play everything original. He just played music. And Mama says, "Oh, Peter, play To Henry to Write To." And he couldn't remember to save his soul. He then started playing and singing, and then he said, "No, I just can't do that." But Mahalia had a lot of relatives in New Orleans, including Alka Bell Clark, who was Mahalia's aunt. And Belle worked for us for years and years and years. She did the cooking and the cleaning, and she babysat us when we were little children. I remember if we were being bad, I guess they had chimney sweepers in Philadelphia, huh?
Yeah.
Well, in Louisiana, in New Orleans, they always worked in pairs. They always dressed in black. They had tailcoats and black pants and tall hats. And they carried bunches of switches on their back, which that's what they used to clean out the chimneys with. And if we were being bad, and they were scary, you see, they were black, all black. And she said, "You're not good. I'm gonna call the chimney sweeper. I'm gonna call him chimney sweeper." She said, "Chimney sweeper." And we'd shut up. We were settled right down. She never had to get him in the house. When Mahalia died, there were a lot of people down there in New Orleans that were her heirs. And my brother Tommy was a very, very good lawyer, and so they went to him to represent them. The lawyer in Chicago who was handling the estate was named Shapiro. And all of New Orleans, the Clarks and the Jacksons, referred to him as Mr. Superior. And Tommy handled that estate with Mr. Superior. That was, my brother was a very unusual man. When he died, he was 81 when he died, he had the biggest funeral, according to the funeral people, that they had ever seen in uptown New Orleans. People just loved him so much. He had a really smart mouth, but it never came out that way, you know. If you say, well, I'll see you tomorrow, he'd say, not if I see you first. But he said it to everybody. I was a boy. When we were living on Drive Street, the first house we lived in New Orleans, I must around 5, maybe 4 or 5, and Tommy was just a little barely able to walk, and he got mad at me or something, and he came after me with the, you know what a mosquito bar is? Well, there are a lot of mosquitoes in New Orleans, particularly in the summer, and so they didn't necessarily have screens on those old houses, but they had these beds with T-sters on them, and they had these rods fixed into the T-ster was sort of a roof over the bed. They had steel rods, and from these steel rods they would hang a net, and they'd tuck it in. When you'd get in bed at night, they'd tuck the net so the mosquitoes couldn't get in. Of course they could. Every morning when you woke up, there'd be a couple of them sitting up there on the inside of the net. So your first job was to get up and kill those mosquitoes that got in the night before. Anyhow, Tommy got hold of one of those steel rods, and he was swinging at me, and I jumped on the sofa, jumped up on the back of the sofa, and took a swing, and I fell off the sofa and broke my arm. But he was unafraid of anything, and he wouldn't quit on anything. That's why I knew to get out of his way with that rod, because I knew he wasn't going to stop. I can remember him when he was maybe 5, trying to throw a basketball through a hoop. And he did that for over half an hour. And he made it. He finally made it. He was a little man. He was about 5'8", and weighed maybe 140, 150 pounds. But he lettered in every sport they had at the school we went to. He played football and basketball and ran the half-mile on the track team, and he was on the tennis team and the golf team. And that's all we had, lettered in 5 sports. My other brother, Dick, was kind of the wild one. He started smoking and drinking when he was 12 years old. Got to be an excellent pool player. Learned in the pool halls of Amite, Louisiana, was where we spent the summers. I'm sure I've talked about that old house before, but Dick took up with all the local guys, and he went down and learned how to drink and smoke and shoot pool, all the stuff that a guy ought to know. And I didn't go for that. It was not my speed. So I never got to be part of the gang in Amite like he was. Because he turned out to be the most successful of all of us. He died when he was 52, lung cancer from all that smoking. But in all that time, starting from nothing, he worked his way up to being president of a big insurance agency, and was, I guess you'd call him a wealthy man when he died. Very good. Tommy did very well too as an attorney. He very successful. This probably won't mean anything to the people if anybody ever looked at this, but he was so efficient as an attorney I'd be in his office in New Orleans and the phone would ring. And he'd start talking to the person, and it turned out they needed to file a lawsuit. And I witnessed this. He'd say, all right, and he'd push a button, and that started his phone recording. And he just began dictating his pleading. He'd ask the guy questions about it, and it might take him 15, 20 minutes to half an hour. By the time he's finished just being hired, he's got his first pleading almost all done. And he told me once, he says, look, I always do the first thing on the pile on my desk. He says, it might take 3 days to do it, and the next piece might take 15 minutes, but I do that. Now, most lawyers, just the other way around, they do the quick stuff and keep putting off what takes a while.
Mm-hmm.
I just learned not to do that when I had the good fortune to be elected judge. Up until then, I fought the battle just like everybody else did as a lawyer, and trying to keep on top of everything and get it done on time and get it in on time. And it's not an easy thing, and if you're not highly organized like he was, you don't get it. But I finally, after about 8 years, 7.5 or 8 years of practicing law, I figured it out. And I was getting it right, and then I went to being a judge, and I wasted all that time.
Wasted all that.
That's a good place to stop.
Tell me about your high school. You in high school.
New Orleans Academy. My mother taught in the grammar school there. It was a small school. There were 22 guys in my graduating class, and we were the biggest one in history. That meant that you might have 80 guys in the high school. And grammar school would maybe be a little bit bigger because there were 8 grades down there. My mother taught 5th and 6th grade and 7th and 8th grade English. A lady named Nellie Pierpont taught 7th and 8th grade and 5th and 6th grade mathematics. And then there were 2 other ladies who handled 1st through 4th. So that's 4 ladies handling the whole grammar school. And very good. You could not fail the course at New Orleans Academy. If you came to school and you didn't know what you were supposed to know, you were kept in after school. And and you stayed there till you knew it. So that you came out knowing some stuff by the time you finished it. There were guys who got grades in the 70s, but they knew what they were supposed to know. Mm-hmm. They had some good traditions there. One, if 2 boys had any kind of a confrontation, they'd have to do 3 rounds in the ring. Captain Perrin, who was the principal, to go out there and draw a ring. And they'd take their shirts off, put on gloves, and go 3 rounds. There was another tradition there called the belt line. The uniforms we wore had big, wide, brown belts, about that wide. And, you know, for the life of me, I can't remember what would instigate a guy having to run the belt line. There was something unofficial within the student body. And so the whole student body would line up. The yard was pretty big. The whole student body would line up with their belts in their hand. And you'd have to run past all of them, all the way to the end of the line. And every one of them would be trying to wipe you on the bottom. That was known as running the belt line. It only happened 2 or 3 times a year, and I can't remember why, but that's what they did. Another thing they did, this was started going on about the time I finished. But they played keep away. and there were supposed to be two sides. But of course, everybody wore the same uniform, so you couldn't tell who was on which side. But one guy would have the ball, and he'd be running, and he was the other side is supposed to get him. Well, nobody knew which side it was on, so they'd all jump. And you'd throw the ball up, and somebody else would catch it, then that would go on through the whole noon recess. Keep away. It was,
We had that game. We had keep away too, but we knew who was on the teams. Did you ever have to do the three?
you don't have to run the belt line.
Did you have to do the three?
No, never did.
Never had to.
I got along with people pretty well. My brother Dick, on the other hand, was in there all the time, and he was pretty good at it. I don't think Tommy was ever in there. He ever had to fight it out with somebody. I remember one time there's a guy named Bill Buddicky. Maybe it was Ed, but anyhow, the last name was Buddicky, and he was in the 8th grade, and he got mad at everybody, so he and challenged the entire 8th grade to go to meet him in the ring. And so that was our Captain Penny. He drew the line, and Buddicky was one of the tallest guys in the class, so he picked the shortest guy in the class to fight him in the first fight. It wasn't that. He happened to pick Alfred LeBlanc. Nobody knew who Alfred was. He had just started the school then. And so Alfred gets out there in the ring with him, and Alfred's like this, and Buddicky like that. And Alfred goes, bat! Knocked him cold. And that was the end of that. Alfred turned out to be an all-state guard in football. He was a good athlete and just as tough as he could be. And finally, his senior year, which was my junior year, we had a big old boy in my class named Howard McKaylee, who was a big red-headed guy, muscles all over, good athlete, played everything. And they wanted to see how he might do against Alfred. And so they both assented, and they drew the line on the ground, and they got in there, and same thing happened. Only this time Alfred broke Howard's nose. About 2 whaps.
That never happened today.
I guess not. But it was a rougher thing. We had another great game we played there called Chicago, which is a form of baseball. So you'd have a catcher and a pitcher and a regular infield. And in the outfield were as many guys as wanted to be. And they had two or three batters. But if you were a batter and you get up there and you hit the ball and you make an out, you are then last in the field. I mean, you'll be the last guy to come to bat behind all the outfielders. You're last in the field. The catcher moves up to being a batter. The pitcher moves into being the catcher. The infield moves around, and one guy in the outfield goes to third base. And that's how you played the game. And if you made it, as long as you made a hit, you stayed at bat. But it was impossible to hit a ball in the outfield that wasn't caught because there were 10 guys out there, maybe 15. I don't know.
I liked that game.
It was good. Everybody got a chance to do everything. I remember one time I came up to bat, and I was a little guy. And I was maybe 120, 125 pounds when I was a senior. And I got up there at bat one time, and I knocked the ball out of the yard, over the fence. And another strange rule we had was that over the fence was out. That's because somebody had to leave the school and go back and get the ball out of the yard of the people behind us, and that would hold up the game too long if you stayed, and so you were outed if you knocked the ball out. So, of course, everybody was thrilled to be out because you knocked the ball over the fence.
Very cool.
See if we had any other weird things. We were a good athletic school. These boys all came from uptown New Orleans. It was a private school, so their parents had to have a little money. And but one year they formed a league called the Riverside League. We played in Class B because we were a small school. And every school in the Riverside League was small. You would know, Newman and Rugby and one or two others in New Orleans, and about 4 or 5 of them in Jefferson Parish, which is right next to New Orleans. And the first year they had 5 sports that the league sponsored. You know, football, basketball, track, tennis, and golf. And we won them all. And the funny thing was, at the end of football, when they presented the trophies, they had a Riverside League champion and a Jefferson Parish champion. The Riverside League champion got a big trophy, and Jefferson Parish champion got a little trophy. But by the time we got to the end of the year, and we had won everything, the Jefferson Parish trophy was big, and the Riverside trophy was little. Of course, that was an unusual year.
Were you on any of the teams?
No, my senior year I made the track team and got a letter. But for this track team, our coach wasn't interested in track. And he was interested in baseball, so we had a baseball team. And the track guys would go out to where the baseball team was. We'd run around. He never told us anything. I was a high jumper. And when I went to Tulane, I went out for track. And this is ridiculous. Just a little shrimp of a guy. I wasn't a very good high jumper. And I went out for the Tulane track team. And my second year, this Navy chief was assigned to Tulane. The name was Froggy Lovren. And he had been a runner at USC, which is a great track school, and had been a national 660-yard champion. And so our coaches never talked to us in the track team. They literally never came out there. Fritz Oaks, who was the head basketball coach, had never even finished college. And he was professor of physical science. But anyhow, Froggy Lovren comes along and he just starts coaching a track team. So he makes us work. He puts you on the track. The first workout he gave us, you jog a half, you walk a quarter, you run a quarter, you walk a quarter. You do this, you do that, but you were not allowed to get off the track until you'd done the whole workout. And so by the time we were finished, 3 or 4 months later, he had you running 2 miles, walking a quarter, so you got in some kind of shape. And then one of the guys on the cross-country team, you need 5 to be on the cross-country team. He asked me if I'd go out for cross-country, because they only had 4 guys. Well, I said, well, let's see if I can run that far first. So we went over all the far, ran around the park, and I made it, so I got on the cross-country team. And I, of course, made the team because there were only 5 of us out there, and I ran. I usually finished in the middle of the track when we were Southern AAU cross-country, and the Jackson Day race, which is, there was a troop of men who left the Spanish fort on the day of the Battle of New Orleans. In order to get there on time, they ran all the way in to all the way into Jackson Square, which is right in the middle of the French Quarter. It's about a 6.5 mile run, something like that. So to commemorate that, and they still do it. They have a Jackson Day race in New Orleans, and I ran Jackson Day race. Bunch of guys running it. I finished 14th in the race, and since it was a handicap, I was 10th in time, which was pretty mediocre, but that's the way I got my name in the paper. Tulane was a day school when I was going there. Nowadays, something like the majority of the students at Tulane University come from New York. And they have big dormitories. And most of the students are from out of state. And they sleep on campus in dormitories. When I was going to school there, the only dormitory they had was for the football players, because they were recruiting them from the coal miners and the steel workers down in Gary, Indiana, and Pittsburgh, and places like that. You get all these big guys down there named Inski, and Tulane was a national football pal back in the 30s. But they had to have a place for the football players to stay, so they had this football players dormitory, and that's where they stayed. And you never saw them because their classrooms were under the stadium. And they all went to school under the stadium. You never saw a football player unless you went to a football game, and then there they were playing football. And most of them were majoring in physical education. I remember that they were given a scholarship. Man got tuition and $15 a month from the school to get by on. And so to overcome the shortfall, Tulane would assign each player to an alumnus. And the better the player, the richer the alumnus. And so I remember Millard White, who was All-American tackle, got a guy who had a factory in New Orleans, and he had a guy who had a big business in New Orleans. And Millard drove around in a convertible, and he wound up marrying the guy's daughter, and became a wealthy executive.
Good work if you can get it.
Oh, I can remember those guys. They were some tough. You'd never see them. The rules, NCAA rules in those days, were the scholarship athlete had to play 2 sports. It wouldn't do that you just played football. So some of them would play basketball. But the great majority of them were out for track. That means they came around lay in the sun, didn't do anything. They had a machine there, another track that ground up the cinders. It was a cinder track. They'd ground up the cinders, and they would grind up cinders, and when they got them fine enough, they'd go over to the place where the track wasn't too good, they'd pack it down. They'd do stuff like that, but none of them. But Millard White was a shot putter, but most of them didn't mess with it at all. And old man Zamurray, who was a big Tulane patron, built them their own dormitory way out in the corner of a big field toward the back of the campus, right across the street from the football stadium, so that they slept right here and they could just cross the stadium and go to class in the football stadium. They had nice classrooms under there for them. And they studied theory of track and theory of basketball and stuff like that. I've been talking about the Ellises mostly, well, entirely since the start, but my mother had a very interesting family too. Her mother was had gotten a master's degree around 1900 at a time when most women didn't even go to school. And her father was a poet and playwright, and later in life a very successful insurance man. And the point of this, it was that my grandmother occupied what they call the easy chair at the Courant Club, which is a ladies' club in uptown New Orleans. And the lady in the easy chair was expected to compose things and lead discussions and all that. And Apu, that's what we call it. It was my first cousin Pat George's best shot at saying apple. And the reason he wanted to call her Apple was because when Pat was a baby, Apu would take a spoon and he'd scrape an apple and then feed him to scrape it, because they didn't have those nice little cans of stuff like they have now. And that was her name. Anyhow, that's what Apu did. And Doris Kent LeBlanc collected the things that Apu would write and give and then forget about, and made up a whole little book called Caught from the Breeze. I still have a copy of it at the house somewhere, but that was a connection between me and my first love and my grandmother. I don't know that I've met Doris Kent LeBlanc, maybe once. All right. That's the end of that anecdote. Well, of course, on LST, everybody was a junior officer, including the skipper, who was a junior grade lieutenant when he took command. And all the other officers, there was one JG, and the rest of us were ensigns and as raw as you could get. I, for instance, had not even finished my officer's training. My class was commissioned before we completed our training because they needed warm bodies to man the many, many, many amphibious vessels that they were building. LSTs, LCTs, LCIs, LSDs, LSMs, and all of them took men, and the men they put on were guys like me.
Just kids
Kids.
who
right?
grew up real quick.
The average age on 751, I would guess, no, I wouldn't have to guess, average age was under 19.
For the crew.
Yeah. We had one old guy who was 36, and our skipper was 26, and our first lieutenant was 30, but everybody else was in the low, not even 20. Everybody else in their teens. My gunnery division consisted of one seaman first class and 5 or 6 seamen second class who had just been through boot camp, gone to striker school to learn how to be a gunner's mate, and then came on board the ship. And that was typical of the whole crew. His back ain't straight. Trouble is, he's 98. They say he used to be a judge. He sided his cases and wouldn't budge. But nowadays he's not so fine. He can't seem to make up his mind. He likes to have a conversation about the things that affect our nation, but he forgets what he would say, and he can't hear you anyway. At the gym 3 times a week, he tries to reach physical peak, but his body still looks like a keg. He's flabby and has skin. Although his attitudes are dated because he's superannuated, he nice to him, or you will see he's one vindictive SOB. He's had a long, eventful life. He's got a good and faithful wife. Life is good, he's feeling fine. But can he make it to 99? Oh, Genevieve, I'd give the world to live again the lovely past. The rose of youth was dew impearled, but now it withers in the blast. I see thy face in every dream, my waking thoughts are full of thee. Thy glance is like the starry beam that falls along the summer sea. Oh, Genevieve, sweet Genevieve, the days may come, the days may go, but still the hand of memory weaves the blissful dreams of long ago. I see thy face in every dream, my waking thoughts are full of thee. Thy glance is like the starry beam that falls along the summer sea. Oh, Genevieve,